The Bible and secular history record the successive rise of 7 world powers that have been dominant factors in mankind's history. As illustrated here, the first 6 world powers were the Egyptian, the Assyrian, the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. Now, these maps show only the main or capital areas, but actually they were far-flung empires that controlled most of the civilized people in the earth. Now, it would not be possible in 1 hour's time to cover all the history of these great powers. Therefore, we will confine our examination to the most important issue of all, and that is, were these world powers on the side of the great Creator and success giver, Jehovah, in the issue of universal sovereignty, or were they really serving the great rebel Satan and were therefore doomed to failure and oblivion? By their fruits you will know them, is the scriptural and logical rule which we will follow tonight. Now, to appreciate the great issues raised by the rebellion, it is necessary to first go back to the very beginnings of mankind. The human race has increased only by procreation. Therefore, tracing our family tree back must inevitably bring us to the first human couple, male and female, man and woman. Now, even science must agree with this fact. In this publication, Races of Mankind, by a number of anthropologists of Columbia University, we read, the Bible story of Adam and Eve, father and mother of the whole human race, told centuries ago the same truth that science has shown today, that all the peoples of the earth are a single family and have a common origin. The races of mankind are what the Bible says they are, brothers. In their bodies is the record of their brotherhood. Now, although this is a science publication, it even shows the proverbial apple. But as one wit put it, it wasn't an apple that caused the trouble in Eden, it was a pear that went bad. Now, the serpent was merely an instrument, like a ventriloquist dummy, by which a rebellious spirit son of God communicated with Eve. As Revelation, the 12th chapter, the 9th verse tells us, Satan is called the original serpent who is misleading the entire inhabited earth. Through the ages, false religions have tried to alibi the rebellion. Despite all the wickedness and evils and the terrible conditions it has brought about, Satan, the great serpent, was depicted, as this ancient plaque shows, as an enlightener, a god of light, and as a refiner. Fire makes gold more valuable by melting away impurities. Likewise, it was claimed that Satan would benefit man by removing what he claimed was an unfair restriction against knowing all about evil as well as good. This knowledge was supposed to elevate man to the status of a god, a super race, living independently and forever. You will be as God, the rebel is quoted, knowing good and evil. You positively will not die, he said at Genesis 3rd chapter, the 4th and 5th verses. Because Satan had used a serpent to ask the first question, recorded in Genesis the 3rd chapter, the 1st verse, is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden? Therefore, he brought into question Jehovah's rightfulness to rule. A serpent design came to be used as a question mark, as we see here. An English science magazine, in a humorous way, illustrated this by means of the drawing, how a question or interrogation point derived from the serpent. You see, the dot was added because the serpent made its point, and so he claims put a period or stop to Jehovah's purposes, but he never did. The influence of the rebel angels exalting their leader can be seen in many of the world's signs and symbols. The question mark, a serpent symbol, is only one of many. However, the total failure of the rebels to give man everlasting life under better conditions than in Eden has vindicated Jehovah's sovereignty and has answered questions as to the rightfulness of his rule. It is interesting to note, as the dictionaries show, that the word angle is derived from angel, and from the Middle English angel also. It seems the slight change from angel to angle, just two letters being transposed, came about to designate those rebel angels who no longer walked straight with Jehovah, but deflected, angled off, as it were, to join in with Satan's new idea or angle of things. As Genesis, the 6th chapter, the 2nd verse shows, they went off on their own tangent down to earth to materialize as humans and take wives, to put on a master race on the earth, the Nephilim. Also, Satan was the first angel to angle for man's attention, and so the word angle also means to bend or to move at an angle, to allure, to entice, or try to gain by some bait or insinuation a specific point of view or scheme. And the word angler is one who dangles a bait to hook or catch, a person who schemes and uses tricks to get something. And this is just exactly what Satan did. So Satan dangled a bait of temptation to entangle Eve, and she was hooked, an expression used to this day to indicate a succumbing to a vice. Archaeologists have found a number of illustrations in which the ancient mystical sign of the angle depicted the deflection and descent of the rebel angels to the earth. As we read, the angle or the meeting of the celestial and the terrestrials coming down to the earth. And this was illustrated sometimes by steps and by other means. Yes, indeed, ancient terms are still used to this day. An ethnological article entitled Migration of Languages and Loan Words states, languages like civilizations have traveled. The Greeks borrowed many words from the Semitic language, that is, from Shem, son of Noah, particularly from the now dead languages of the Babylonians and Assyrians. Many words have come up from Babylon and Assyria, and even from before that. Latin borrowed many words from the Greek, and all modern languages have inherited much from Latin. So we shouldn't be surprised that many words that we now use come in from the most ancient times, from Babylon and other ancient civilizations. The materialized angels and their hybrid offspring did not fulfill Satan's original campaign promise to keep man living forever as a greater godlike race. He failed completely. Instead, evil, wickedness, and destruction filled the earth. As we see here, Greek artists and writers later described in a fanciful way the tales of the pre-flood violence involving the materialized demons and their offspring, the giant Nephilim or Fellas. As our book Aid to Bible Understanding points out, on pages 688 and 1220, the accounts of the doings of the materialized demons and giants were passed on by the flood survivors to their descendants and down to later generations, including the Greeks. Recent archaeological records confirm the existence back there of the Nephilim and their terrible doings. Yes, indeed, so terribly wicked were conditions that Jehovah decreed an earth-covering flood to literally liquidate that generation. That destruction also pictured the removal of all rebels against Jehovah at the great tribulation ending in Armageddon that's now so close at hand. The saving of Noah and his family pictured the deliverance of a great multitude now serving Jehovah into a new order of things that will continue forever. Recently at the door, a man said to me, you Jehovah's Witnesses come around even when we want to see the Giants football game. I told him, well, there were Giants in Noah's days too. And their little game was washed out. But the good news of Jehovah's vindication and the establishment of his reign forever means that throughout eternity, these terrible conditions will never have to be repeated. Nahum, the 1st chapter, the 9th verse states, "What will you men think up next against me?" Jehovah has permitted every idea of demon and devil and man to put up a superior race as they promised, living forever under better conditions than in Eden. But they have failed. So now the test is about ready to be completed. And as the scripture says at Nahum, distress, affliction, will not rise up a second time. Just think of it. Throughout the eternal ages ahead, never again will these terrible things have to be repeated, because everything has been demonstrated in favor of Jehovah and his reign. After the flood, as the ancient historian Hyginus relates, and we quote, "Men lived under the government of Jehovah, without cities and without laws, and all speaking one language. Then Hermas," and that means Ham's son, none other than Cush, began making speeches with his own interpretations. Discord began, and a distribution of the people. Hermas, or Ham's son, Cush, was the father of Nimrod, who was used by the serpent god as his caduceus. The two serpents plainly shows, and this is on almost every medical insignia, because Satan promised to heal man and give him a better life. So they used the serpents as a symbol of healing. In the Chaldean language, the name Cush was pronounced chaos, from which the word chaos stems, from the discord he sowed. He was called the messenger of the god, as the wings indicate, and he was called by the Greeks Mercury. He was also the god of commerce, and the name Mercury gave rise to the words merchant and merchandise. The Greeks represented him in his older age. He was a spiritualist, a hypnotist, a magician, and a trickster. And by flowery speeches he induced many to migrate to the east, away from Noah's and Shem and his faithful people at that time that were living peacefully in Salem. And so they separated, migrated to the east, where they later founded Babylon. The Babylonians began the worship not only of idols, but also of their symbols. On this ancient seal, we see a priest worshiping a triangle, as we note. And this represented the triad of Nimrod, Cush, and Ishtar. But it also tried to indicate that their type of government and rule was one that knew all the angles. There was the woman's angle, the younger men's, and the older men. Jehovah's all-over wisdom, of course, was ignored. The triangle also represented the triad of Nimrod, Cush, and Ishtar, all later deified. Yes, these three were supposed to represent a superior type of government. But, of course, they failed, and Babylon was destroyed, as we will see. Now, the triangle often contained an eye to represent the rebels' claim that their God was all-seeing and all-knowing, and was the provider of good fortune and energy to his people. Today, mystic cults claim that the use of a triangle, a gadget of amulet, brings superior results. In Egypt, the triangle with an eye in it was passed down through the ages to our time. The Great Seal of the United States, illustrated here, which appears on the back of all $1 bills, is of the same basic design. So once again, Babylon and Egypt comes up to the present day. Walking under a ladder became a superstition, because the ladder formed a triangle. And anyone, as it says here, it may strange to you that people won't walk under wooden ladders. This superstition stems from the early mystics, who saw the triangle as a symbol of the Trinity and hence of eternity. Anyone who barges through the triangle under a ladder is therefore tempting the fates, who may retaliate by upsetting a bucket of paint on him. Ancient musical instruments sometimes incorporated the triangle symbol, as for instance the balalaika, played in honor of the god Baal or Bel, mentioned in the Bible as one of the chief gods of Babylon. Yes, he was in their triad or trinity also. The ancient word for God was El. It began to be applied not only to Jehovah, but to other demon gods, as we see here, the god El. Now this caused confusion, and the Babylonians began to refer to their god as Bel, the Beth El, or the bee god, That is the second god, not Jehovah, but Satan, of course, the serpent god. And not that they considered the serpent god inferior. No, the Beth or B or second god was considered twice as great as Jehovah. The book Symbolism in the Bible and Church states, Satan was the second god in ancient theology. Also, the term Deus, meaning two, came to designate this second or serpent god. As the dictionaries show, the word Deus means two, but it also means the devil, Duce, Duke, leader, chief, or head. Il Duce really means our leader, the devil. And as one dictionary says, these three senses, two, the devil, leader, are very intimately linked. The numeral 2 came to be written in the serpentine form, as we see. The influence of the demons in misusing signs and symbols to honor their serpent god is very obvious. The root term Deus the root word Deus found its way into many words and expressions. The deuce with it means the devil with it. And Il Duce, our leader, the devil. In card games, the 2 is often called the deuce, and in some cards the devil is shown. And it also forms part of many words, such as caduceus, the 2 serpents. He seduced the first couple, he reduced them, he induced them to revolt, they were dupes. He dueled with Jehovah. He doubled, that is, he acted as another god, just like a movie star will sometimes have a double who takes his place once in a while, and Satan tried to take the place of Jehovah. He abducted the first couple. He conducted them away. They were ductile. He introduced them to rebellion by means of a duologue. He subdued them. He educated them into this duplicity. Such words, of course, have lost their original designation and have today another common meaning, and therefore we can ordinarily use them in our common language. In fact, as 1 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, the 1st to 8th verses points out, even meats once offered to idols, but later sold in the common market, could be used by Christians. And so many of the signs that we see today, because they have become just common symbols, can be ordinarily used. But we have to be careful and not to use any that might connect us with some of the religions of Babylon the Great. The ancient island city of Tyre had an imitation tree of life in an imitation Garden of Eden, as we see here. And this appears on many of those coins. This was of good value, and the coins were taken almost everywhere, and they became a sort of international currency. And historians point out that the dollar sign comes from this principle of making the tree of life and combined with the 2 pillars of Hercules with the serpent on it. And that's the way the dollar sign originated, according to many historians. Now, Tyre was a famous trade center, and at the mouth of its harbor, it had 2 stone great pillars, and these were supposedly placed there by the god Hercules. Well, today, it seems that modern Tyre, still under its Zeus god Mammon, erected 2 great pillars, or towers, overlooking the New York City harbor. And these even came to be called, as in ancient Tyre, the Trade Center. And they are the highest double towers in the world. And they are said to be the result of a Herculean effort. Yes, indeed, the signs and symbols of Satan's ancient world, especially from Babylon, have been perpetuated to this day. The holding up of 2 fingers was also a Deus sign, an ancient symbol of victory in Satan's world, and still is. It also represented the 2 horns of the devil, a symbol of his authority. According to the Dictionary of Superstitions, Churchill, during the war, made this sign indicating a victory, and he was told it was a devil call, but he said the devil will use it just the same. Babylon also originated the use of hands in salutes and religious gestures. The modern fascist, Nazi, and other national salutes were first used in Babylon, which is also known as the city of the right hand of Anu, one of their chief gods. The use of hand salutes through the ages indicates once again that the great world powers were and are still serving Satan, the rebel god. Jehovah's Word forbids the making of gestures of worship or salutes to idols, inanimate things, or anything on earth or in the heavens. But they do it just the same. Babylon did not become the first great world power because of the dispersion of the people. At the time their language was confused. However, so much of Babylonian religion, a false religion, originated back there up to the present time, that it's good to examine Babylon first. In fact, our new book, Survival into a New Earth, on page 82, states concerning the world empire of false religion called in the Bible Babylon the Great, and we quote, "What is Babylon the Great? Viewed collectively, all religions that advocate attitudes, beliefs, or practices that have their roots in the religion of ancient Babylon make up Babylon the Great. Its identifying traits can therefore be determined by examining the origin and religion of ancient Babylon itself." And so we do that also. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of at least 53 churches in ancient Babylon, all dedicated to demon gods. Most were built in this stepped or stage form called the ziggurat, which means mountain or temple of God. These had altars in them in which holy fire was kept, and evidently that's where the expression holy smoke originated. Incense and also narcotics were burned, and the vapor filling the temple room gave the people a religious lift or high. Small narcotic tapers, little tapers containing narcotics or other ingredients, were burnt and put near the nose to be sniffed, and also sometimes held between the teeth. And because of this ceremony was performed in the ziggurats, these tapers came to be called after that name, cigarettes. The Aztecs and Mayans used shortened form, thicker cigarettes, which they called cigars. And some English call their little cigarettes cigs. And no doubt the smokers of the narcotic ziggurats in Babylon did some zigging and zagging. As this book from the book Amulets and Talismans states, plants containing narcotics and stimulants were known and used by the ancient religionists. The extracts were used in various ways in their ceremonies, and the effect was considered magical, a rapture from the gods. This ancient Babylonian symbol of the intertwined serpents shows who these gods were, none other than Satan and demons. Yes, indeed, they have ensnared many people into their vile and deadly habit. Yes, Satan and the demons are the real pushers of dope. To carry out their idea that the rebel god was a great king and enlightener whose word would stand forever, this symbol of a lion with a bee in his mouth was used by the priests. Now this star indicates that this represents a god in symbol. Every time archaeologists find a plaque with a star above it, they know that the bottom, the illustration under it, represents either accurately or in symbol a god. Now the bees sometimes buzz near the ear, and the expression buzzing came to mean a secret revealing of religious mysteries, later confidential information, or today it's often spoken of as gossiping. Candles made of beeswax were lit in honor of the Babylonian god, and even to this day in the Catholic Church and some others, their candles are always made out of beeswax. Also, the term bee came to mean the contest, originally between Jehovah and Satan, but today, for example, a spelling bee, it's called the bee after this contest. In this spelling bee, the person who spells out all his words correctly is the winner. For in a great contest of supremacy, Satan was supposed to win, and his words proved true. But the humming bee god failed, and many people realized that they had been stung. So they coined the expression humbug, which came to mean false words. And the dictionary tells us the word humbug to be deceived by a spirit bogey. Yes, in ancient Babylon, the bee was reverenced as a god, and the wax was used for their candles, just as today. In ancient times, flies were a great nuisance. People would pray to this image of Beelzebub, who was supposed to be able to control and disperse the pests. Beelzebub is referred to in the scriptures as the ruler of the demons, but he was not able to eliminate the curse of flies that Jehovah pronounced on Egypt. There to this day, as Isaiah, the 7th chapter, the 18th and 19th verse foretold. The flies settle down, and travelers in Egypt tell of the swarms of these large bees that bite painfully, even in Cairo and other cities. And the priests of this would bang on their drums 3 times, and this kind of ceremony became so monotonous that the word humdrum came to be used. But like all other gods, Beelzebub proved to be just another fly-by-night. Some of the people of Babylon realized that their leaders were serving Satan. Their leaders were so vile and wicked. King Merodach, for example, was called the prop of the wicked devil by his own people. A Baladan, like all corrupt politicians to this day, made great grants of property that were not his to his subjects. He gave them many concessions, including reduced taxes, probably no taxes, which the poor had to bear just as today. The investigative reporter, the columnist Jack Anderson, points out that although the oil companies make billions of dollars profit, they pay not a penny in taxes because Congress passed laws exempting them, just as was done back there in ancient Babylon. Many millionaires, a number of them, pay not a penny of tax, while the poor people have the burden. As the caption states, Babylonian priests worship not only the effigies, images of the god, but also their symbols mounted in the temple. Notice that the priest is worshiping a cross, just as priests do to this day. This cross with the ring around it represented their sun god, and this represented their moon god. The book Migration of Symbols points out that solar crosses of many types, as we see illustrated here, were worshipped not only by the Babylonians, but by the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and other world powers. Now it comes as a surprise to many people that the cross was a religious symbol used long before Christ's time, but archaeology and history confirms the fact beyond dispute. And also the hypocritical and evil use of these symbols by the evil priests and wicked ones gave rise to such common expressions as he was cross with them, meaning he was angry with them, or he was crossed out, assassinated, or he was deceived, he was crossed up, or he was double-crossed. Words that indicated the wickedness and evil of the priests. When Eve and others died, the promise of Satan, "You positively will not die," was proven completely false. So he invented other lies to cover up. He said man doesn't really die. He has a mysterious, invisible soul that remains true. In other words, hit a man on the head with a hammer and he becomes unconscious. Hit him a little more harder and he becomes alive, because his soul is alive. Here we see that lie pictured. A soul escorted to the underworld by 2 funeral genii. Yes, this was another one of Satan's lies to cover up the fact that he could not give everlasting life to his people as he promised. The terrible results of this false teaching can be seen from this illustration showing slaves being led to be killed so that their souls might serve the dead king in an afterlife. Archaeologists have found such tombs with the king or queen and their slaughtered servants lying around. But this is nothing compared to the millions of soldiers who have given their lives on the battlefield in the false belief taught to them by their chaplains and other religionists that immediately upon death in battle, a priest's soul goes straight to a heaven of some sort. And this is still taught by the chaplains behind the different armies, urging people of their own religious faith, Catholic or Protestant or Jewish, to go and kill one another. What hypocrisy. The immortal soul idea gave rise to many superstitions still prevalent in the world powers to this day. For instance, when a person sneezes, worldly people will immediately say, God bless you. Just why God has to wait until somebody sneezes to bless him, they can't explain. It goes back to the belief that a person has two souls, a good one and a bad one. A sneeze indicated the expelling of some of the bad soul, so they had to ask God to expel more, and they would say, God bless you. The more sneezes, the better. When someone did something bad or irrational, as was common by even the leaders and others, it was excused by saying, oh, it wasn't his good soul. His good soul had stepped out of his body for a while and was just standing next to him. And his bad soul had taken over. And his good soul couldn't do anything about it because he was just standing there. Hence the expression, he was besides himself. To appease the demons, Babylonians made many amulets and charms, some in the shape of the fallen angels, a sort of buttering them up. Today, the sale of religious talismans and good luck charms is considered big business by Wall Street. This clipping points up another superstition still prevalent. It reads, Formosans, bearing names they considered beneath their dignity, may change them this month. Superstitious parents here often name their children beggar, thief, dog, or pig in the hope that evil spirits will not notice persons with such lowly monikers. Well, in Europe and many other areas to this day, to hide the real names of their children, parents give them a second name to confuse Old Nick the devil. And if you look in most dictionaries, you'll find under Nick or Old Nick that it was an old name for Satan. Thus the term Nick's name or nickname originated. You give them a name to appease Nick or the devil. And many false religions, because of superstition, refuse to pronounce the name of the true God, Jehovah. They use another word instead, really a nickname, sponsored by Nick, Satan. Now, Jehovah is against those who hide his personal name. He's not afraid of the devil, and his people make known his name, and they are truly blessed because of it, even with the hope of everlasting life in his new order, so close at hand now. Because superstition can replace common sense, practical reasonings, as well as Jehovah's word, terrible calamities can result. This British submarine, the Truculent, had been ordered to sail on Friday the 13th. However, according to a sailor's superstition, that might bring bad luck. The reason they claimed 13 was bad was because at the Last Supper, there were 12 disciples and Jesus making 13, and one of them proved to be a traitor. As a result of this superstition, still practiced and being completely false, one ship rammed the submarine and sunk it with the loss of all lives aboard. And submarine commanders are trained to obey orders implicitly. But here, because of a superstition, the captain disobeyed orders, showing what a whole superstition, false religious teachings can have on people. Babylon originated violent and deadly sports, such as prize fighting, as we see here. Religious chants was sung first to bless the contestants. And today also, nations play their national anthem before a boxing match. The word anthem, as dictionaries show, means, quote, a religious song derived from the priest's chants. So after singing a religious anthem, national anthem, the fighters go about beating one another's brains out and very often killing one another. The number of deaths from boxing in the last 50 years really amounts up to over 100. In 607 BCE, Babylon was permitted by Jehovah to destroy unfaithful Jerusalem, and to take many Jewish captives away. Because of their disobedience, finally Jehovah withdrew his protection, and the devil, with the Romans as his tool, was able to destroy the city and take away captives, which were led in a triumphal procession through the famous Ishtar Gate. And on the Ishtar Gate you find the serpent, the Sarush, which was a serpent with legs. They didn't like to have their serpent god crawling on his belly, so they gave him legs. Because of Babylon's wicked opposition to Jehovah, he foretold through his prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others that Babylon would become a perpetual desolation. And here we see the barren mound before archaeologists began to dig in it. And to this day, even though they dig, it gets covered with dirt by the winds, and it's very barren. Just a few ancient buildings, the remains are to be seen. Jehovah's word always comes to pass in every detail. And this is unusual because the river Euphrates is near, and this land should be fertile, fruitful, but Jehovah cursed it, and true to his curse, the land became nitrous, and nothing grows as we see. Yes, again, Jehovah's word proves true. His prophecies are fulfilled in every little detail, and that's why we know that the remaining for our day and for the future are certain to come to pass also. With Satan's defeat at the Tower of Babel and the dispersion of the people, some migrated in the direction of Africa, and under the influence of their serpent god, depicted here, as we see 3 times for emphasis, Egypt was built up and later became the first great world empire. Here we see also the sun symbol, the 2 horns of the devil, and here we see the cross called the Crux Ansata, the cross with the handle, which was their sign of life. And as the sun disk was also shown in many of their temples, they worship this under the title Great Disk O. And in those temples and their festivals, they had dances, and they were the first disco dancers and disco joints. But their hieroglyphic sign did not give everlasting life to any of their descendants. No, it did not give life to any Egyptian, small or great. This museum Egyptologist quipped, "I know the dead are really dead. My mummy done told me." Satan's promise to give everlasting life to pharaohs and others failed, of course. Egypt also had its religious hand signs, as this one here, raised to the statue of Isis and Child. Now today, this sign is usually thought to mean okay or all right, but in some countries in South America, it is still a very evil and phallic symbol. A Bethel brother was passing another one on the steps, and he made this sign, simply indicating everything's all right. But a visitor from South America, from Brazil, happened to see him make this, and he bawled the brother out. He said, "Never make that sign. It's so vital, so has such a bad meaning that if you make it in the public, you can be arrested." In fact, some sports shirts went down, T-shirts were sent down to Rio de Janeiro and Argentina, and they had printed on it this sign meaning A-OK. But because it's such an evil sign, the police has confiscated and destroyed all those shirts. So perhaps this sign is best to be avoided because we just might be misunderstood by some visitors. Despite the pomp and power of the pharaohs, their line, their religion, and their sacred died out just as Jehovah foretold. But because one pharaoh in Joseph's time did serve him faithfully, Jehovah did not decree total desolation as for Babylon. Instead, it was to become a minor nation, as Ezekiel the 29th chapter, the 18th verse, foretold it must become a lowly kingdom. And in many of its cities, in some over 30 of its cities, every detail of Jehovah's prophecies have come to pass. And one, for example, these idols representing the power of Pharaoh were lined up to show the desolation of the city. Some cities were foretold to be completely destroyed. They were. Some were told to be moved. Some were transported in ways. Every single prophecy concerning the major cities was fulfilled in every detail. What foresight Jehovah has. We can surely depend upon his foresight and prophecies because they are very accurate. Assyrian Semites, that is, they were descendants of Shem, Noah's son, but they had become hypocritical and demonized, and they had a war against Egypt and settled by the Hamites, followers or descendants of Ham. But under Satan's control, they warred constantly, and finally Assyria became dominant, defeated Egypt, and Assyria became the second dominant world power. But just as a serpent periodically sheds its skin and emerges a little larger and different in design, but still the same serpent, so each succeeding world power was basically the same devilish system of things. And here we see the god Ashur, representing the demon god of this world, Satan, of course. Assyria was named after this demon god, as we see. The Assyrians and later the Persians represented their triune god, as we see here. Their slogan seems to say, 3 heads are better than 1, even if 2 have no bodies. This is an imitation tree of life, and it was claimed that by just touching or tapping it, one would ensure good luck and good fortune, protection. And the custom of knocking on wood is still prevalent, used by many people for good luck. Assyria was very cruel in warfare. It often tortured its captives by pulling their tongues and eyes out, skinning them alive. Jehovah's prophets, Nahum and Zephaniah, foretold, "Woe to the city of bloodshed! I shall make you a grave." And archaeologists tell us that as you stand off from Nineveh, it looks like a mound over a freshly occupied grave. Yes, Jehovah's prophecies come to pass in every detail. But unlike Babylon, which was foretold to be a complete desolation without any animals, without sheep, the shepherds allowing their animals to stop, the land became nitrous, and shepherds wouldn't allow their sheep to even lick the dust for fear they get poisoned. The prophecy said that there would be some greenery and sheep would graze near Nineveh. And this because one of the generations of Nineveh in Jonah's time did turn to serve Jehovah and were faithful. Jehovah always remembers faithfulness to him and always rewards it, even to later generations. So the fact that sheep grow there is very interesting. And in this area, there are many of the spiritual sheep, Jehovah's people, who have their congregations nearby. Just as serpents will sometimes kill and swallow up other snakes, so Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon were swallowed up by the conquering Medes and Persians. But the serpent god was still served, as these symbols very plainly show. Their god of light was called Ahura Mazda. Exactly what false religion is, a double cross. These idols were supposed to safeguard the capital city of Persia, Persepolis. But these bulls proved no bulwark against Jehovah's prophecies. He predicted the fall, and Persia, the fourth world power, was doomed also to a desolation, just as we see here. Jehovah had foretold at Daniel the 9th chapter that the king of Greece would conquer Medo-Persia and become the 5th world power. And here we see Alexander's Greek troops burning the capital city of Medo-Persia, Persepolis. In Isaiah, the 14th chapter and the 27th chapter, in condemning Satan's world further, Jehovah said, "You brought your own land to ruin. You killed your own people. Satan's world powers destroyed one another." What terrible hypocrisy. So Jehovah called it to account, and the judgment of the nations of Satan's world has been written. At Obadiah, the 1st chapter, the 16th verse, we read concerning the nations, "They will certainly become as though they never happened to be." Complete obliteration. Alexander, arranged to be deified, declared to be a god. He was very egotistical and didn't want to be considered just human, a great human, but also a god. So the two horns, representing the deuce symbol of Satan and his power, was placed on his head, as we see here. However, no god can prevent Jehovah's prophetic word from being fulfilled. When Alexander started to rebuild Babylon, and had all preparations to do so, he suddenly contracted a mysterious illness and he died. Babylon was never rebuilt, just as Jehovah decreed. The early settlers of Greeks were the Upites, or serpent devil worshippers. From them, the Greek word for serpent, Ops or ops, derives, and indicating the god they served. Greek troops often have serpents on their shields for good luck and protection from their god. Now Satan promised in Eden, "Your eyes will be opened." And to this day, the word ops is applied to those who claim they can heal the eyes and make you see better, the optometrists and the ophthalmologists. Of course, they can't prevent blindness. They might do a little good here and there, but it waits upon Jehovah, who says he will open the eyes of the blind in his new order, as the scriptures tell us. Greece's power as the fifth world empire could not save its empire or its gods. They all lost their heads and headship. In the Psalm, the 72nd Psalm, the 9th verse, the Bible predicts, "And his very enemies will lick the dust itself." And here we see the prophecy fulfilled. These idols representing gods actually had their face in the earth. Rome succeeded Greece and became the sixth world power. But once again, it was only the serpent changing its skin, for the worship of the serpent god continued. Roman currency, the lira, further manifests that fact. The lira symbol is the L, written in the serpent form, and it stood for, the L, as we have said, was the word for God, L, but they used it in this form of the serpent. The two bars, or the deuce sign, were those of the devil. And Satan said he would be equal to God, and in arithmetic, the double line is the sign for equal. 2 plus 2 equals, and they put two lines. So you see once again how Satan's world is filled with his symbols to this day. And so the Libra sign was derived from the serpent, as we see, and with the two serpents, the caduceus, and other demonic emblems. And it is still being used to this very day. Rome also had its violent, deadly sports. Gladiators fought and destroyed one another. And the spectators would turn thumbs down when they wanted a wounded gladiator who they didn't think put up too good a fight, killed. And this gladiator had to kill whoever they put thumbs down. Well, football today has been likened to these contests because 24 or more are killed yearly. That surprises many people, but mainly in high school and other sports, they ram their necks and sometimes kill themselves. A television program showed two young boys lying with broken necks, doomed to lay there until they die, cannot move their body, and broke their necks in a football game. Rome continued the crowding down of Jehovah's typical kingdom that began with the capture of Jerusalem in 607 BCE by the Babylonians. Because of the unfaithfulness of the Israelites, Jehovah again, this time, permitted Rome to recapture Jerusalem in 70 CE. Jewish captives were sold as slaves, families torn apart to their Greece, and were scattered all over the earth, many taken to Rome to be slaves. The Roman Empire, as a world power, was also doomed, according to Jehovah's prophecies. It began to degenerate and disintegrate, and even its chief god, Jupiter, could not save his own temple, as we see here from these ruins of the temple of Jupiter. Now the Romans would swear by their greatest god, by Jupiter, they would say. But instead it was bye-bye Jupiter. And soon it will be bye-bye Satan and all his wicked. The apostles of Jesus warned that after their departure, some would give heed to seducing spirits and fall away from the faith. And some, it seems, even return to the worship of the serpent, the false enlightener and healer, on his imitation tree of life, as we see doing here. An apostate worshiping a serpent on an imitation tree of life by the purifying fire. Today, many Satan and serpent cults exist. In fact, they are rapidly increasing. And only recently a newspaper article and others pointed out that many lost children have been kidnapped and offered as sacrifice by some of these Satan cults. Just think of it. And some of these call themselves Christians, even though they worship Satan and his symbols. It was during the days of Roman dominance that apostate Christianity was merged with Roman paganism and came to be called Christendom. But it became devilish also. Now Jesus told Peter at Matthew the 26th chapter, 52nd verse, "Return the sword to its place, for all those who take the sword will perish by the sword." And Revelation repeats these words for emphasis. Yes, Jesus forbade any holy wars even to save him when he told Peter not to defend him. But Christendom disobeys hypocritically. 8 terrible and disastrous crusades were organized by popes who called themselves Peter's successors. And the pagan symbol of the cross, the solar symbol, was used by them. And they even looked like demons, certainly not as like Christians. One crusade consisted only of children, organized by a pope who wanted to shame Catholic kings who did not want their best soldiers sent off only to be slaughtered in a crusade. Thousands of children went off to war and were never heard from again. The word crusade means to take the cross, which we have seen was a pagan symbol of the sun. Dante, a Catholic, believed that popes had been so wicked that they really should be punished in a hell, as this illustration from his imaginative book, Dante's Inferno, shows. He was only using his imagination to carry out his ideas of vengeance, but today Dante's Inferno is very often taught as a literal place. Dante knew that some of the popes had been so vile and wicked and immoral that he believed that some of them should have special attention, and so Virgil, Dante's guide, shows him some of the popes head first down in the fire, and every once in a while a demon would come and put red-hot coals on the soles of their feet. The false God-dishonoring doctrine of hellfire and eternal torture originated in Babylon, as archaeologists have discovered from plaques. Well, it has been said of the Bible students, as Jehovah's Witnesses were sometimes called, that they turned the waters of truth on and put the fires of hell out. Christendom's calendar, devised by Pope Gregory and called the Gregorian calendar, honors and exalts only pagan gods. Every day of the week is named after a vile demon god. The moon gods, vile immoral. Tuesday, god of war. Woden's day, a god of war and fighting. Thor's day, also an evil god. Friday, from Phrygia, a very immoral god. Saturday, after Saturn, a name equated with Satan. And Sunday, after the sun god. Think of it. Here was a pope, supposedly a Christian, and he devised a calendar honoring only pagan demon gods. What hypocrisy. Even the music scale of the world today stems from Babylon and Egypt. The clef symbol is serpentine in form. Now, Babylon priests had a chant of 7 notes. They chanted first on one lower note, then after a while they chanted on the next higher note, and then after a while on another higher note, and they did this 7 times. And this chant was adopted by the Catholic Church and came to be called the Gregorian chant. And the designations do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do comes from a Romans poem to one of their saints. But this scale is imperfect and incomplete. The Greeks added 5 half notes, but scientists have discovered that a scale of 105 notes is possible. An experimental organ of 32 notes was able to reproduce many beautiful sounds of nature, birds singing, water rippling, and thunder and others. The Hawaiian guitar is very musical and melodious because the slide, as it glides, picks up some of these in-between notes. So the music of Jehovah's New Order will certainly be extremely beautiful, rich, pleasant, and perfectly complete, and so will man's hearing and his appreciation. The Roman world empire also began to decline and fall, and so Satan began developing a new angle, 3 angles in fact. A country formerly a conquered territory of Rome began to emerge as the 7th world power. Interesting is the fact that the word England means Angleland, derived from the early settlers who still bore the corrupted name applied to the fallen angels, the Anglics. The national church is still called the Anglican, and it teaches a Trinity whose symbol, the triangle, applies not to Jehovah, but to a God considered thrice great, a mystery, how 3 gods can be only one God, and one God could be 3 gods. I was talking to a Seventh-day Adventist, a doctor. He was studying to be a doctor. He was about ready to graduate, and he argued for the Trinity. And although I showed him many, many scriptures that showed that, behold, Jehovah is one Jehovah, and his name one, and Jesus plainly admitted that he was only the Son, that his Father, Jehovah, was the great God, that Jesus could do nothing, and many, many other scriptures, but he wouldn't accept that. And so finally, I did what one of our early lessons in argumentation and refutation. It said to reduce to an absurdity. If you can make something so absurd that people will even laugh at it, you're accomplishing a few things at once. You're not only getting your point across, but you're getting it across in a humorous way, and people, when they laugh, can't be very angry. So they more or less have to accept it in a pleasant way. And also, nobody wants to be laughed at, so they begin to automatically come out from under that thing that they're laughing at. And so I said to this doctor, I said, when you operate on somebody, do you have to get permission from his other 2 bodies? I said, man was created in the image of God. It would have been not quite honest with God not to give man 3 bodies like he himself enjoys. Why, man could send one body to work, the other could go to a movie, the third could stay home in bed. It would be nice if 3 bodies could sit in one seat in a bus, not a bus. And then I said, when you operate, which body do you cut into? Well, he laughed, he got the point, and he admitted that the Trinity was very foolish, and he would no longer believe in it. And he also admitted that the name of God was Jehovah. So he came along by using some of these, reducing to absurdities. The name Great Britain stems from the Roman goddess Britannia. She became a national emblem with a shield that has 2 crosses on it. And it is said that the 2 crosses really represents the double cross of international diplomacy. The Roman serpent symbol stems from the lira and became from Britain, as we see here. And the Roman symbol, the lira, as we have seen, also was adopted by England and became the sign of her currency, as we see here. Notice the serpent with the crown on him, Satan, the god of this world, the king of this world, his Caduceus, and the L meaning God written in the serpent form. This is the symbol for, here's the star meaning God. This is the symbol for English currency, the pound. The Caduceus England also adopted many Babylonian symbols, including the caduceus, which became the symbol of medical, commercial organizations, and even the banking institutions. Here we see the doors of the Bank of England with this caduceus on it. And many other banks in England, Canada, and even in the United States have this symbol somewhere in their banks. Newspapers also adopted the double serpent as their emblem, as we see from leading newspaper, The Times, in England. Now, certainly newspapers have been used as mighty propaganda dispensers by the nations of Satan's world. They have supported nationalism, world wars, and other evils. And newspapers have been used to attack Jehovah's Witnesses at times. And even when they have to admit the good works and the conduct of Jehovah's people, they often include subtle derogatory sneers and remarks. Bible prophecy likens the seventh world power to two-horned beast on a seven-headed beast. The two horns represent the Anglo-American, that is, all the English-speaking nations. The origin of the name America is very interesting. It is usually attributed to Americus Vespucci or to a liberal German priest by that name. But they were very minor characters, certainly not important enough to name great continents after. No, Webster's Dictionary, Universal Dictionary, mentions another, the original application of the name, an aboriginal, going back to the ancient peoples, or one of the various copper-colored natives found on the American continent by the Europeans. It seems that, as we see, the people who came over to settle America, the Dutch and the Germans and others, noticed that the color of the Indians here, and that's why they came to be called Indians, because they were so similar in color to those of Asiatic India. They noticed that the system of government here was very similar to those in ancient India also. That is, they had tribes ruled by a chief. And so they came to call these people here the America, or as we see, Amir, a rural chief, prince, a oriental type of dignity, and Rika, realm, power, dominion, combining force. So America is the original application of the name, following the idea that the people in this nation, this world, had this a similar type of government as in ancient India. In fact, the natives here came to be still called Indians, even after it was known that this was a separate continent. So we see that the word America actually comes from, as we will see, inspired by the demons. Now, serpent worship was common in this continent as in India. The Aztecs, Mayans, and others called their chief god Quetzalcoatl. As we see here, he is devouring a sacrifice or someone that was disobedient to him. And here we see the other symbols, the angle here coming down to the earth of the angels, the rebellious angels, and the question mark that is used, and others. Apparently, the rebel angels promoted the term America to apply to the god of this world, their Amir or prince, in his Rika or rule. As now, the Aztecs were a vast civilization. In their major city, there was 1 million of them. The Mayans and others had many, many people, and they were highly advanced. Their mathematics were excellent. Their language, words were good. Their architecture, temples and others, was superb. Their astronomy was up to date. They had the same monetary system. So in every way they were intelligent humans. But you see, they were separated from the main body in Europe, and so now Satan wanted to consolidate his rule. He wanted to become the god of all the continents, the ruler of this world. So he went about combining this. And the Bible, as he says now, as Jesus said, the whole world is lying in the power of the evil one. John the 5th chapter, the 9th verse says. So it was to officially add and dedicate this continent to the God of this world, to join up the two, that as Jesus called them, that the sign of the cross was implanted by Columbus, who was a devout member of one of the leading religions of Babylon the Great, Satan's world of false religion. So we see Satan wanting to become the god of the entire earth, also combined the European continent and American continent and added them to his world rule. And that's where the word Amir Rika, the rule of the Prince Amir in his rule Rika. That's where the word America really comes from. Thus we see from their false religions and gods, and from their serpent signs and symbols, and from their wickedness and evil doings, all seven world powers were and are still, whatever remains of them, part of Satan's world. Jehovah has tolerated their rule for nearly 6,000 years as part of the test, trial, leading to the vindication of his name and purposes. However, the uninterrupted rule of the rebels, must run out sometime. And according to Bible chronology, it ran out in the fall of the year 1914. In this book, The Time is at Hand, first presented the word, this was written in 1884 by Jehovah's people, and pointed the finger to the year 1914 as the year in which the times of the Gentiles would end. And this would be marked, according to the prophecies, by a great world war, followed by a great world pestilence and other worldwide events increasing in scope to this day. And true to the prophecy, not just one nation or power, but all put together rose up like wild beasts to destroy one another. And this manifested again the unfitness of Satan's world to continue to rule. Now, the New York Times called the World War Armageddon, but actually it was just the prelude leading up to World War, actually the beginning of the last generation of the old system of things, ending in a total demonstration of the wickedness of Satan's world and his people, his nations. Great hypocrisy can be seen in the fact that warplanes with crosses painted on them, as we see, bombed civilians so that ambulances with the same cross could carry them away. It is certainly evident that Satan's world has brought forth only evil fruits and is worthy of Jehovah's judgment. At this possess notice, a final witness must be served on the nations by Jehovah's people, and this would require a period of time of about a generation, as the Bible shows. This generation shall not pass until all things are fulfilled, Jesus said. But in opposition, the nations hypocritically set up a League of Nations which deceived many people into believing that a permanent peace was at hand. This was set up in 1918 after the First World War. However, Jehovah's Word taught otherwise. This booklet was printed by Jehovah's people in 1930. At that time, the League of Nations was running full blast, seemingly on its way to accomplish something. And also in this country there was prohibition, which was to put an end to drunkenness and all these other things. However, Jehovah's people showed from the Bible that both these things were of the devil, that the League of Nations would fail, and that so would prohibition. And prohibition did fail. In fact, it gave rise to gangs. And today, the mafia and others are merely offshoots of the terrible gangs that were formed to deliver alcohol and alcoholic beverages during prohibition. So once again, Jehovah's Witnesses handle the prophetic word of right. And this shows that they are the ones who correctly understand the Bible prophecies, because at this time practically the whole world believed that the League of Nations was what the Christendom called the political expression of God's kingdom on earth. But Jehovah's Witnesses said it was only a subterfuge of the devil. And in this booklet, the League of Nations was pointed out to definitely fail, and later to be resurrected into a newer form. But all these things have come to pass accurately. Yes, as foretold, another attempt at world peace and control was foretold to be instigated. The United Nations organization, a part of the 8th world power. However, some call it disunited nations because they are indeed beastly, arguing, fighting, and terrorizing one another continually. The New York Post columnist in a recent interview said this: the United Nations is better known as the Tower of Babel. So, as crisis follows crisis in the rebellious world, it sends out its SOS, save the world, science editorial pleads. And because of science developing instruments of total destruction, the atomic bomb and others, they now call for a new science, the science to save us from science. But nobody says the science to save us from the Bible. No, its prophecies have come to pass accurately all through the ages in our time, and this remainder, the good news, is bound to come to pass shortly in our time. The SOS might mean save us Satan, or save our serpent, because the S is a symbol of Satan, the serpent, and the O is a symbol of the sun god. And it's interesting to note that in telegraphy, the S is sounded by 3 dots and the O by 3 dashes. When they send out SOS to ships, they use 3 dots and 3 dashes. And the 3 were what the priests of Babylon and other false religions pounded on their drums to honor their serpent god 3 times, and then 3 long ones to honor their sun god. So SOS actually goes back to the ancient religionists who appealed to their serpent and sun god to save them. However, the scripture at the 1 John, the 5th chapter, the 19th, tells us the whole world lies in the power of the wicked one. But then, as 2 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, the 11th, states, that we may not be overreached by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. So we see that Satan has polluted his world with his signs and symbols, but we are aware of them, and we can very often use these things in the witness work. I was getting my suit from a tailor. The woman made out my bill, and she put a $sign there, and I asked her, do you know where that $sign comes from? No. When I explained how it comes from the serpent on the imitation tree of life and Tyre, she got very interested, and now she's interested in the truth. And if you want to have some fun, ask the doctors why they have 2 deadly serpents as a symbol of healing. Serpents kill and sting, and they don't know. They flounder, and you can have a nice time witnessing. Yes, although Jehovah does not hear the SOS of the evil world, he does hear the cries of many sincere people. Revelation, the 6th chapter, the 9th verse, foretells that, quote, a great crowd which no man was able to number, out of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues. These are the ones that come up out of the tribulation. They don't go down in it, but they come up safely out of it. But the rest of mankind who have taken their stand, take their stand on Satan's side and our goats, will go down at Armageddon. Isaiah, the 52nd chapter, the 6th verse, further identifies Jehovah's people today. My people will know my name. And this does not mean just to know its pronunciation, but to understand it, understand its greatness and what it stands for. and then to move in harmony with it, to live up to that great name. And Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones who do that today. They have taken the name of Jehovah, the only people to do so, and they have lived up to it in their work. They are the only ones who are fulfilling the prophecies of witnessing to all the nations concerning God's kingdom, Armageddon, and the signs of the times. They are only people who are bearing the fruits of God's Spirit. When I was a boy, my father took me to see some ball games, and even as a boy, I couldn't understand the great noise, shouting and yelling, and smoke. You could hardly see the players, cigarette smoke, and people drinking beer and getting drunk. And I said, what kind of a deal is this? Just for a little contest. And now things are getting worse. Riots sometimes kill, and the shots have been fired, and the owners of the ball game teams don't know how to control their crowds. But if you go to one of Jehovah's Witnesses conventions, what do you see? People of all kinds of nations, thousands of them, even 100,000. In Brazil, 165,000 people congregated in one stadium, and the papers couldn't get over. One newspaper said they are out of this world for orderliness. And that's true. They are out of this world because they are a new world society. And the Bible tells us these are the people who will inherit what the first couple were driven out, a paradise earth. Everything that man lost by the rebellion of their first parents will gradually be restored until paradise conditions exist everywhere. And aren't we happy that Jehovah God is a God who keeps his word, because this new order is absolutely certain. Show me one Bible prophecy that hasn't come to pass in the way and at the time. It's been my privilege to represent the society and speaking to colleges who science departments on evolution versus the Bible, so on. And one of the things I like to do is, in a very nice, gentle way, challenge them to show me one Bible prophecy that didn't come to pass in the way and at the time. So far, nobody has come to show me even one. On the other hand, there are books that have been written, such as the Encyclopedia of Bible Prophecy, that lists over 2,816 Bible prophecies that archaeologists know have been fulfilled, going way back to ancient world powers and times and places and peoples. And never once do they say, after one of these prophecies, and they've only picked out the specific, those that name places and times, peoples and events specifically. But never once do they say, well, this prophecy wasn't fulfilled, or we have no evidence. Every one has come to pass, so we can be absolutely sure that Jehovah keeps his word. As Solomon said when he examined the prophecies to his day, I have not found one word of all his good promises that have failed, and they never will fail, because he's a God of truth and righteousness. Yes, even the animals will be at peace with each other in the new order, and when the wolf sees the lamb, it won't have any desire to wolf it down. Isaiah, the 11th chapter, the 9th verse states, they will do no harm nor cause any ruin in all my holy mountain, his kingdom. So even the animals are going to be at peace with mankind. This scripture is repeated at Isaiah, the 65th chapter, the 25th verse, for emphasis. Nothing shall hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. I'll make the evil beasts cease out of the land. Even the serpents are going to eat dust, that is, eat only things that drop on the earth like fruit, and not have to kill. A remarkable thing will take place in the new order. People will be getting younger as they grow older. They'll be getting older and younger at the same time. Yes, Job, the 33rd chapter, the 25th verse tells us, they shall return to the days of their youthful vigor. Their skin shall become fresher than that of a child's. You ever see how tight and smooth and colorful a child's skin is? That's the way it'll be with all people in the new order. And even science is beginning to recognize that things can go back, because experiments with rats have brought new insights into human aging and the possibility that we can stop it. And Jehovah will teach man, and by means of his spirit they will progress up the way until they become have perfect bodies that can go on living forever. Think of the day so near now when gray hairs will start to return to their former color, when new teeth will begin to push out bridges and false teeth, when people will begin to discard eyeglasses because they can see better without them, and when they look in the mirror, where are those wrinkles that I had last year? When the lame shall leap as a stag, when the eyes of the blind shall be open, and the deaf hear, so on, as Isaiah the 35th chapter, 5th verse tells us. And husbands will say to their wives, you know, you are getting more beautiful every single day, prettier every day. And the wife will look at the husband and say, to think I once thought Clark Gable was handsome. And no inhabitant shall say I am sick, so no one will say, I think I'm coming down with the flu. The flu will have flown. As recorded at Mark, the 5th chapter, the 41st and 42nd verses, when Jesus awakened from death the daughter of the presiding officer of the synagogue, the Bible tells us that the happiness of her parents is so great that they were in great ecstasy. And this was just a preview of the great resurrection soon to begin. Think of the joy when loved ones meet again in the new order. The Jewish women had to throw their children into the Nile or have them killed by the Egyptian soldiers, children up to 2 years. The Bible says, cease your weeping, they will be returned to their own border. Also the children that the Rome Caesar killed in Jesus' time, Jewish children up to 2 years in the hope of destroying Jesus. Also the scripture says, applies to them, cease your weeping, they will return to their own border. In other words, they'll be returned to you. Well, now just think, in the new order, a couple will be in their room and they hear a cry in the next room. And they run in, and there's that very same child that was killed before their eyes. Think what happiness there will be when all relatives and friends and others come back. But in witnessing, we have to be a little careful. I spoke to one elderly man, and he invited me in, and I saw he was getting kind of old, and I asked him if he was married. He said, yes, but my wife died. And I said, well, do you know the hope that your wife will be returned in the new order? She said, I hope she doesn't. She was a bitch. She made he said, she made my life hell on earth. So I had to ask him if some of his relatives, finally he agreed that one of his nephews had been a good man. He'd like to see him come back. So we have to be a little careful. Yes. Even these sea creatures will become pets. Isaiah, the 35th chapter, the first verse, foretells the desert shall blossom as the saffron. It really will be joyful, with joyousness and with glad crying out. Think of beauty so great that it will evoke a crying out in sheer pleasure at just looking at things. And sometimes we do when we see a beautiful mountain scene or other natural scene. We just feel a great pleasure. Well, the whole earth is going to be like that. It will really be joyful with joyousness and glad crying out just to see it. All the animals will be friendly to man and will be a light in many ways with their beautiful color and plumage and beauty. And they're everywhere, and they will be everywhere in great variety. Today a few drab sparrows and a few drab birds can be seen, but the bird of paradise and others with their beautiful plumage will be returned and will be seen in plenty by mankind. Everything will be colorful and interesting and a joy in Jehovah's new order. And even the sea creatures will become pets, and man will teach them many amusing tricks. Biologists tell us that many animals have a sense of humor. They love to romp and play with man. Even the sharks have been tamed, and killer whales have been tamed. Man rides on the back of killer whales in some aquariums. Under the sea and up in the air and everywhere, there will be friendship between man and animals. And the beauties under the earth and the thousands of beautiful caves will be explored and enjoyed. Instead of being a place for burial, caves will be places for the living to visit and appreciate. The entire earth will be a garden of paradise. The flowers will scent the air with delightful perfumes. No pollution, smog, or unhealthy vapors that now threaten all life will be permitted. One man said that in Manhattan, New York, in his apartment, he used to have excellent cross ventilation. Now he says all he gets is cross pollution. And there'll be no nerve-destroying noises as so everywhere. No danger from atomic bombs or nothing shall hurt or destroy. No terrible accidents on the road. Then you will travel safely on your way. Be no robberies and murders and muggings and shooting and killings. It says they shall dwell in the land in safety. And who will enjoy this? Well, the 37th Psalm, the 11th verse states, the meek ones themselves will possess the earth, and they will indeed find their exquisite delight in the abundance of peace. And the meek ones are those who hear Jehovah's word and are happy to come into harmony with him and his purposes and to do what is required to honor him in this final great witness work, the greatest life-saving work ever done, the gathering of the great crowd in the hope of everlasting life in the new system. In the darkness of this world, Jehovah's promises stand firm and sure as this beautiful rainbow reminder betokens. The great world powers of Satan's world have failed to give man everlasting life under better conditions than those in Eden. Under the serpent God, they have only filled this earth with every imaginable evil and every sort of wickedness. But now the time is at hand for Jehovah's kingdom to take over. And it will not bring just life, and not just everlasting life, but everlasting life in its very fullness beyond even our fondest expectations. Let us remain firm on Jehovah's side of the great issue, serving him as is required, and gaining not only the hope of life, but the hope of honor. You know, when some of the faithful men come back from earth in the resurrection, people will say, look at there's David. Look at there's Shem. He went through the flood, and so on. And then they will say, look over there's an Armageddon survivor. Let's go over and find out about the last days. Yes, the Armageddon survivors will gain the same honor that the faithful men of old. So let us continue to serve the great God, be on his side of the great issue, and gain the hope of not being cast away as the world powers have been and will be, but enjoying everlasting life and honor and reward in Jehovah's wonderful new order now just ahead. Thank you.